Hi, shalom friends. When I was growing up and I came downstairs to greet my mom before starting the day, she always insisted that I smile and be in a good mood. And when the occasional times that happened, I came down in a less than favorable mood, she would always make the comment, "Oh, it looks like you woke up on your left side." I never exactly understood what she meant by that, but growing up I always associated the right side as something of goodness and joy, and the left side of something negative. As I matured and studied more, I realized that there's a beautiful verse in the book of the Song of Songs written by King Solomon, where there's a description between two people deeply in love. And in one of the verses it says, "His left hand cradles my head, it's under my head, but his right hand embraces me." And I understood from the way, the imagery and the poetry, that the right hand embraces, it brings closer. The left hand actually keeps a bit of a distance. Because, with all due respect to lefties, because by most people, the right hand is the stronger, more dominant hand. So we want to emphasize the right hand, the embrace, over the left, which keeps a distance. And the Talmud actually says it very beautifully. The Talmud, to change a bit of the language, if you want to discipline a person, discipline him with your left hand. The left hand rejects, pushes away, keeps a distance, but the right hand embraces. So, practically speaking, if you want to discipline a person, when it comes to complimenting the good, make sure that it's effusive, make sure that it's strong, and that the person hears the compliment, hears the desire of you, that of the appreciation, and the desire of you to get closer to this person. When you're displeased, for whatever reason, certainly it's a good reason, even if you're going to reject or create that distance, like I'm disappointed, do it with the left hand. Not so strong, not so intense. Let the right hand always be dominant. One of the greatest spiritual heroes of the 20th century was the 6th Rabbi of Lubavitch, of Chabad. His name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, and he took over the leadership of a world nature, but primarily his influence was felt in Russia in the 1920s. And eventually, in the 1940, he manages miraculously to come to America. This holy individual was known not only for his saintliness and his scholarship. Of course, it included his leadership qualities, but first, and maybe foremost, was for his absolute, unconditional love for a fellow Jew. And there are numerous, maybe countless stories of his kindness to people, never asking for a donation, never asking for a religious commitment, never demanding allegiance as a follower, simply one Jew being merciful and kind to another. Well, to grow into such a personality, you have to be educated. So he has a charming memoir where he was either 4 or 5, and he's with his father, and he says, "Father, why is it that we have one mouth and we have one nose, but we have 2 eyes?" And the father, wanting to make sure that the kid knows the difference between right and left, he says, "You know the difference between 2 letters in the Hebrew alphabet that look exactly alike but are pronounced differently. One is called a shin, one is called a sin. They're written exactly the same, but there is a dot, one to the right, one to the left." He says, "Do you know the difference between these 2 letters? They look exactly the same." He said, "Yeah, the first letter has the dot on the right and it's pronounced shin, and the second one has a dot on the left, it's pronounced sin." So when the Rebbe realized that he knows the difference between right and left, he said, Now we understand the eye. Your right eye should always be looking at the goodness of a fellow Jew. Your left eye should be looking at tchotchkes, at candy and toys. The right is the embrace. You want to get close. So when it comes to looking at a fellow Jew, do not judge him. Your initial and primary concern should be how we could unite, how we could be brought together. When it comes to your candy, when it comes to your toys, there's an attraction, but it doesn't have to be very strong. It could be with the left eye. In fact, you could even judge it and say, do I really need this candy? Or should the money be spent or the time be spent on a toy? Maybe there's something more important. Right and left. It's not only a mystical concept, it's really down to earth every single day. When something doesn't go your way, you ask someone to show up on time. You told your wife, don't touch my desk. Whatever it might be, and they don't do it. Sadly, really sadly, we judge it as an affront, as an insult, as being disloyal, disobeying, when all you have to do is use your right eye to see it from a different angle. A most charming story from the Talmud, and I'm adapting the words a bit. This takes us back many, many years ago, and there was a Jewish family that lived up north in Israel, in the Galil, and he was not very wealthy. He had a small parcel of land, and he barely eked out enough for sustenance. So he tells his wife and children, down south towards Jerusalem, I heard there's a very wealthy landowner. He has extensive fields and flocks, and he's always looking for managers and people to work. I'm going to go try to get a job and work for him. But in order to amass enough money so we could expand our own farm, I'm actually going to stay there for years. And they bid him farewell, and he travels down south. He meets this wealthy landowner who's a very fine individual, and he presents himself that I'm willing to work essentially to be a member of your household for a salary. And they hit off very well. He's treated respectfully. He has his own room. He's never, God forbid, looked down as a servant, because he's not. He's a worker. And he puts his heart and soul. At times he's in the fields, at times he's managing the fields, other times he fills in for the shepherd, and his salary is accruing. Board and bread he had, so he didn't need it to be paid in cash. When it came the third year and the holiday season began, it was before the Day of Atonement, he meets his boss slash master, and he says, I miss my wife, my family, I'm going home. And can you please give me my wages? And the fellow looks at him and he says, wages? I'm sorry, I don't have any cash to give you. Which was rather surprising, because being a manager, he was constantly buying and selling. There's always some shekels around. But when the master, who always treated him fairly and honestly, says he has no money, he says, well, if that's the case, I could take my wages in grain, fruits, barley, wheat. And the fellow says, I'm really very sorry, I don't have that either. Now this is a denial of reality. He looks out the window, there's fields. He himself was in charge of the harvest. The granaries and the silos are filled. But when his honest and decent employer told him, I have no fruits of, he said, okay, how about if you gave me a flock of sheep or something to that effect? He says, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't have that either. And he could hear the bleating of the sheep and the bellowing of the cows. So finally, almost in desperation, he says, I'm going to go back. I don't want to go back empty-handed. Can I maybe take something from the house? Where I come from, if we sell linen, which was everything was handmade, and maybe some garments, the equivalent of a marketplace, I'll be able to, he says, I'm really very sorry. I don't have anything to give you. And he's sitting in a room where he could see chairs, tables, linen, dishes, pottyware. But after all, his employer was an honest and fair individual. If he says he doesn't have, he doesn't have. So the employer bids him farewell, and with a couple of coins that he accumulated over the 3 years for pocket money, he goes home. The welcome he received, we do not know. A couple of weeks later, this man who worked 3 years and left empty-handed is confronted with an interesting sight. Leading into the village where he was a procession of mules led by his former employer. He sees his employer, he runs over. Oh, what a pleasure, from south to north. Please come into my humble abode. It's the least I could do. I ate and drank and slept by you for 3 years. Please come. And he comes in, and the employer starts to his former employee, and he says, I brought refreshments for us. And they start unloading food and drink and spices. The amount of food and spices that he brought in itself was years of salary, because obviously there was just such an abundance he could sell it. They eat, they drink, they rejoice. And finally, the former employee says, and what brings my esteemed master to my humble abode? He says, I never paid you. And he takes out a big sack and he pays him. So now the former employee thanks him gratefully. You brought so many gifts, and I thank you. He says, before I leave, I want to ask you, what did you think when I told you I have no money? He says, well, knowing you that you're honest and decent, I figured if you have no money, that means because you were about to sign a lucrative deal and you needed every shekel. So you couldn't give it to me. I understood. And when you asked me for grain and I said I don't have, and you yourself saw the grain in front of you, said, well, I was thinking that there are many gifts that you have to give the priest and the Levi. You didn't yet do it, so you weren't permitted to give it to me. And when I asked you, when you asked me for animals, what did you think? He said, well, I really wasn't sure. I thought maybe perhaps you dedicated it to the temple. And when finally was sitting by the table and you see everything in the room, and I told you I don't have anything, what did you think then? He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. I thought that maybe you said that you were going to sell everything over here and give it to charity. So the employer said to his employee, I want to let you know what happened. Shortly before you came to me, I heard a very distressing report about my son. And it almost implied that he did not respect me or my wishes. All he wanted was that after I die, he'll inherit everything. In my fury and anger, I just blurted out, I swear you will get nothing from me, because everything that I possess right now, I'm going to dedicate to the holy temple. Then you came and asked me, and I realized I couldn't give you anything. Even the chair that I was sitting on eventually would have to be sold and the money given to the temple. But of course, after some reflection, I realized, why did I lose my temper? And I found out that my son actually never meant this message. So I had my vow revoked. And now I could give you what you deserve. And all I could bless you with is the same way you judged me favorably, may the Almighty judge everything you do favorably. And with this story, I close. I don't have to give any interpretations. It is so moving. Why do we have to interpret what people do to us or say to us in a negative way? Why not just interpret it as, I didn't hear, I didn't understand, they spoke in anger, they spoke in jest, they did not understand me, and that's it. You say, well, and then what will you gain? What you will gain is that your right hand will embrace people. What you will gain is closeness to humanity. What you'll gain is being calm. And most of all, you will gain that the Almighty God, who sees our heart and judges us, will judge us favorably. Shalom.